My aunt didn't realize she butt-dialed me. I heard her, my sister, and my mom laughing, calling me a useless burden while bragging about how I always pay their rent. "He's too desperate to say no," she snorted. I said nothing until they asked for this month's rent. I, 32M, never thought a butt-dial would change everything. Last Tuesday, my phone buzzed with a call from my aunt. I picked up expecting the usual small talk, but instead heard laughter echoing from what sounded like our family kitchen. My stomach dropped when I realized they had no idea I was listening. My aunt's voice came through crystal clear as she told my mom and sister about how easy it was to get money from me. She said I was too desperate for family approval to ever say no to their requests. My sister chimed in, calling me a pushover who would never stand up for himself. Then my mom added that I was basically their personal ATM, always good for rent money when they needed it. The worst part was hearing my aunt snort with laughter as she bragged about how I had been covering their rent for 8 months straight. She told them I was so pathetic and lonely that I would do anything to feel needed. My sister agreed, saying they had trained me well to be their financial safety net. I sat in my car outside my office building, listening to the 3 most important women in my life tear me apart for 15 minutes. They discussed how to approach me for next month's rent, with my aunt suggesting they should make me feel extra guilty by mentioning how hard times were for them. My mom recommended having my sister call since I had always been protective of her. When the call finally ended, I stared at my phone screen for what felt like hours. 8 months of sacrificing my own financial stability, turning down dates because I couldn't afford them, eating ramen for dinner most nights so I could send them money. All while they laughed behind my back about what an easy mark I was. The next few days passed in a blur. I went to work, came home to my tiny studio apartment, and tried to process what I had heard. Every interaction with my family over the past months suddenly made sense. The way my sister would call crying about her bills, how my mom would casually mention struggling with rent, my aunt's sudden interest in my life, coinciding perfectly with her financial troubles. I had always been the responsible one in our family. After Dad died 5 years ago, I stepped up to help everyone stay afloat. My sister was still in college, my mom was struggling with depression, and my aunt had recently gotten divorced. I thought I was being a good son and brother by helping out financially. Apparently, I was just being a fool. My sister called on Friday, right on schedule. She sounded upset as she explained that her part-time job had cut her hours and she was worried about making rent. She asked if I could help out this month, promising to pay me back when things got better. The old me would have already been calculating how much I could spare. Instead, I told her I would think about it and call her back. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went out. I used the money I would normally send home to take myself to a nice dinner, bought new clothes that actually fit properly, and even went to a movie. It felt strange spending money on myself after so long, but also liberating. On Sunday, my aunt texted asking if I could cover her portion of the rent this month. She claimed her hours had been reduced at work and she was behind on bills. The message was perfectly crafted to tug at my heartstrings, mentioning how much Dad would have wanted me to take care of the family. I screenshot the message and saved it. Monday brought a call from my mom. She sounded stressed as she explained that both my sister and aunt were struggling financially this month, and she couldn't cover all 3 portions of their shared rent alone. She asked if I could help them out, emphasizing how much they all depended on me and appreciated everything I did for them. I listened to her entire speech about family obligations and sticking together during tough times. The same speech she had probably practiced while laughing about what a sucker I was. When she finished, I told her I needed to check my finances and would get back to her. That evening, I sat down and calculated exactly how much money I had sent to them over the past 8 months. The total was staggering. Nearly $15,000 that could have gone toward my own student loans, my emergency fund, or maybe even a down payment on a real apartment. Instead, it had funded their lifestyle while they mocked me for being too weak to say no. Tuesday arrived with increasingly desperate messages from all 3 of them. My sister sent photos of overdue notices, my aunt called twice leaving voicemails about potential eviction, and my mom texted asking if something was wrong since I hadn't responded yet. They were clearly panicking as their usual source of free money remained silent. By Wednesday, the messages had taken on a different tone. My sister accused me of being selfish and forgetting about family loyalty. My aunt suggested I must be going through something and offered to talk if I needed support. My mom tried a guilt trip about how disappointed Dad would be if I abandoned the family when they needed me most. I decided it was time for a family meeting. Thursday evening, I showed up at the house they all shared unannounced. The surprise on their faces when I walked through the front door was almost comical. They had clearly been discussing their money problems because the conversation stopped abruptly when I appeared. My mom recovered first, pulling me into a hug and expressing relief that I had come over. She said they had all been worried about me since I had been so quiet lately. My sister joined in, mentioning how unlike me it was to not respond to family emergencies. My aunt nodded along, adding that they knew something must be seriously wrong for me to ignore their needs. I let them fuss over me for a few minutes, accepting their offers of coffee and settling into the living room where we used to watch movies together as kids. They arranged themselves around me like vultures circling prey, each wearing expressions of concern mixed with barely concealed desperation. My mom started the conversation by gently asking if I was having financial troubles of my own. She said she understood if I couldn't help this month, but wanted to make sure I was okay. My sister quickly added that they were willing to find other solutions if I was struggling, though she made it clear they were running out of options. My aunt took a different approach, suggesting that maybe I had been giving them too much money and should focus on my own needs first. She said they felt guilty for always coming to me with their problems, even though I was such a generous person who never complained. The performance was masterful, hitting all the right notes to make me feel both guilty and appreciated. I listened to their entire presentation with growing amazement at their acting skills. These were the same people who had spent 15 minutes laughing about what an easy target I was, now sitting here pretending to care about my well-being while obviously fishing for rent money. When they finished their carefully rehearsed speeches, I pulled out my phone and placed it on the coffee table between us. The silence that followed was deafening as recognition dawned on their faces. My aunt went pale, my sister's mouth fell open, and my mom actually leaned back like the phone might explode. I calmly explained that I had heard their entire conversation the previous Tuesday, thanks to an accidental call. I described in detail their discussion about training me to be their personal ATM, their laughter about my desperation for family approval, and their strategic planning for future financial requests. The room erupted in stammered explanations and desperate backpedaling. My aunt claimed they had just been venting frustration and didn't mean any of it. My sister insisted they were grateful for my help and the conversation had been taken out of context. My mom tried to explain that they sometimes said things they didn't mean when they were stressed about money. I let them exhaust themselves with excuses before responding. I told them I understood exactly what they meant because I had heard their genuine laughter and excitement while discussing their manipulation tactics. There was no misunderstanding or context that could explain away 15 minutes of detailed mockery. My sister started crying, claiming she never meant to hurt me and truly appreciated everything I had done. My aunt joined in, insisting they loved me and valued me as more than just a source of money. My mom tried to bridge the gap by acknowledging they had said hurtful things while emphasizing how much they needed my support. I stood up to leave, but my mom grabbed my arm and begged me not to abandon them over a private conversation that was never meant to hurt me. She reminded me of all the times they had been there for me, conveniently forgetting that most of those instances involved me helping them rather than the other way around. Before walking out, I told them they would need to figure out this month's rent on their own. I explained that I would no longer be their financial safety net since they clearly saw me as nothing more than a useful idiot. The look of genuine panic that crossed all three faces was almost worth 8 months of financial sacrifice. Update 1. The fallout began immediately. Within an hour of leaving their house, my phone started buzzing with increasingly frantic calls and messages. My sister sent a dozen texts alternating between apologies and accusations. My aunt left voicemails explaining how the conversation had been blown out of proportion. My mom tried calling me every 20 minutes for the rest of the evening. By Friday morning, other family members had gotten involved. My cousin called asking what was wrong with my mom, who had apparently been crying all night. My uncle wanted to know why my aunt was suddenly asking him for money. Even my grandmother somehow got wind of the situation and called to ask why the family was fighting. I gave each of them the same simple explanation without going into details about the overheard conversation. I told them I had been helping with rent for months, but had decided to focus on my own financial stability instead. Most of them seemed to understand, though a few suggested I should continue helping during this difficult time. The weekend brought a new strategy from the three conspirators. Instead of direct contact, they started using other family members as intermediaries. My grandmother called asking me to reconsider because family was the most important thing in life. My cousin suggested maybe there had been some kind of misunderstanding that could be worked out. My uncle took a different approach, calling to ask if I was being too harsh over something that was probably just frustration talking. He reminded me that people say things they don't mean when they're worried about money, and maybe I should give them another chance to make things right. I appreciated their concern, but made it clear that my decision was final. I had heard enough to understand exactly how my family viewed me, and no amount of apologizing could undo months of deliberate manipulation and mockery. Sunday brought the most desperate attempt yet. My mom showed up at my apartment building unannounced, waiting in the lobby until I came home from grocery shopping. She looked terrible, with dark circles under her eyes and clothes that suggested she had been too stressed to care about her appearance. She followed me up to my apartment, talking the entire time about how sorry they all were and how much they valued me as a person, not just for financial support. She insisted they had learned their lesson and would never take advantage of my generosity again. She even offered to pay me back some of the money I had given them over the months. Once we were inside my apartment, she broke down completely. She cried about how they might lose their place if they couldn't come up with rent money, how my sister might have to drop out of school, how my aunt might have to move back in with her ex-husband. She painted a picture of complete family destruction, all because of my stubbornness. I made her tea and listened to her entire emotional appeal without interrupting. When she finished, I asked her a simple question about whether she remembered laughing when my aunt called me too desperate to say no. The question hit her like a physical blow, and she started crying even harder. She admitted they had said terrible things but claimed it was just a way of dealing with their guilt about always needing my help. She said they made jokes to cope with feeling like burdens, even though they knew I gave money willingly. She insisted the laughter was nervous rather than genuine mockery. I told her I had heard the genuine joy in their voices while discussing their manipulation tactics, and no reframing could change that reality. She left my apartment defeated, finally understanding that her usual emotional manipulation wouldn't work this time. Update 2. Monday marked exactly 1 week since the butt dial that changed everything. The panic had clearly set in for all three of them as rent was due in just a few days. My phone buzzed constantly with increasingly creative attempts to guilt me into resuming my financial support. My sister tried a new angle, calling to tell me about a potential job opportunity that would help her become financially independent. She claimed she had learned her lesson about relying on family for money and just needed help with this month's rent while she got back on her feet. The job story was obviously fabricated, complete with convenient details designed to make me feel hopeful about her future independence. My aunt took a more direct approach, sending a long email detailing her financial situation and explaining how a temporary setback had left her short on rent money. She promised this would be the last time she asked for help and included a payment plan showing how she would reimburse me over the next 6 months. The level of detail in her fabricated hardship story was impressive. My mom tried emotional blackmail, sending photos of eviction notices and overdue bills while asking if I really wanted to be responsible for destroying our family. She reminded me that Dad had always emphasized the importance of taking care of each other, conveniently ignoring how that philosophy apparently didn't extend to treating me with basic respect. By Tuesday, they had apparently compared notes and decided to coordinate their efforts. All three showed up at my workplace during my lunch break, creating a scene in the parking lot that had my coworkers staring through windows. They took turns pleading their cases while I sat in my car, trying to eat a sandwich. The public nature of their desperation was both embarrassing and revealing. They clearly hoped social pressure would force me to give in rather than continue the confrontation in front of my colleagues. Instead, it just demonstrated how far they were willing to go to maintain their easy source of income. I rolled down my window just enough to tell them I would call security if they didn't leave immediately. My mom started crying again, my sister accused me of being heartless, and my aunt suggested I was having some kind of mental breakdown that required professional help. Their performance attracted even more attention from curious onlookers. Wednesday brought a temporary ceasefire as they apparently realized their dramatic tactics were backfiring. Instead of direct contact, I received calls from several family members asking me to reconsider my position. Each conversation revealed how much information my mom, sister, and aunt had shared about their financial crisis. My grandmother called again, this time with more details about their situation. She mentioned specific amounts they needed and timelines for eviction, information she could only have gotten from the three conspirators. She asked me to think about how Dad would want me to handle the situation, playing the same card my mom had used repeatedly. My youngest cousin, who was only 16, somehow got my number and called crying about how the adults in her family were constantly fighting about money. She asked if there was anything I could do to help because she was scared about what would happen if they lost their house. Using a child as an emotional weapon was a new low, even for them. Thursday afternoon brought the most surprising development yet. My sister showed up at my apartment with a cashier's check for $3,000, claiming it was partial repayment for all the money I had given them. She said they had managed to scrape together some funds and wanted to prove they weren't just using me for money. The check appeared legitimate, and she seemed genuinely hopeful that this gesture would convince me to help with the current rent crisis. She explained they had sold some belongings and borrowed money from other sources to make this payment, demonstrating their commitment to changing the relationship dynamic. I was almost impressed by the effort until I realized the check was probably funded by money borrowed specifically for this manipulation attempt. They were essentially taking out loans to create the appearance of repayment while still expecting me to cover their immediate needs. The mathematics of their financial crisis didn't add up to legitimate repayment. I accepted the check, but told my sister it didn't change my decision about the rent. She broke down crying again, asking what more I wanted from them and accusing me of being impossible to please. She said they were trying everything to make things right, but nothing seemed good enough for me. Friday arrived with radio silence from all three conspirators. After a week of constant contact, the sudden quiet was almost more unnerving than the previous bombardment. I wondered if they had finally accepted my decision or were planning some new strategy to regain their financial lifeline. Update 3. The silence didn't last long. Saturday morning brought a knock on my door that I initially ignored, assuming it was another family member trying to ambush me at home. The knocking persisted for nearly 10 minutes before curiosity got the better of me. I looked through the peephole to see my aunt standing in the hallway with 2 large suitcases and what appeared to be several boxes. She looked exhausted and defeated, nothing like the confident woman who had been bragging about manipulating me just 2 weeks earlier. When I opened the door, she immediately launched into an explanation about being evicted from the house and having nowhere else to go. She said my mom and sister had found temporary places to stay with other relatives, but everyone else was too cramped to accommodate her as well. She asked if she could crash on my couch for just a few days until she figured out her next move. The audacity was breathtaking. After weeks of manipulation attempts and years of financial exploitation, she wanted to move into my tiny studio apartment as a freeloader. She seemed genuinely surprised when I told her that wouldn't be happening and suggested she contact local shelters or social services for assistance. She broke down completely, admitting that the eviction was real and they had burned through their relationships with other family members by asking for money. She confessed that I had been their most reliable source of financial support, and losing that had created a domino effect of problems they couldn't solve. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the laughter in her voice as she bragged about training me to be their personal ATM, and my sympathy evaporated. I told her she needed to leave my building immediately, or I would call building security. She gathered her belongings and left, but not before making one final attempt at manipulation. She said she hoped I was happy destroying the family that had always loved and supported me, and that Dad would be ashamed of how selfish I had become. The words stung, even though I knew they were calculated to hurt me. Sunday brought news through the family grapevine about where everyone had ended up. My sister had moved back in with my grandmother temporarily, sleeping on the couch in the tiny apartment. My mom was staying with my uncle's family in their basement, which was apparently causing tension in their household. My aunt had indeed ended up at a shelter, according to my cousin who called to update me on the situation. The cousin seemed to expect this information to trigger a guilt response that would send me running to solve everyone's problems. Instead, it just confirmed that there had been real consequences for their manipulation. Monday marked 2 weeks since the butt dial, and I was surprised to realize how much lighter I felt without the constant financial pressure. For the first time in months, I was able to look at my bank account without immediately calculating how much I could afford to give away. I used some of the money I would normally have sent them to pay down my student loans and add to my emergency fund. I also treated myself to a decent dinner at a restaurant I had been wanting to try for months, but couldn't afford while funding their lifestyle. The most interesting development came Tuesday when my grandmother called with a different tone than her previous guilt-tripping attempts. She said she had been thinking about the situation and wanted to understand what had really happened between me and the rest of the family. I decided to tell her about the overheard conversation, playing the relevant parts of the recording I had made during the call. Her reaction was immediate and intense, with long periods of silence interrupted by expressions of disgust and disappointment. She said she had no idea they had been talking about me that way. My grandmother apologized for pressuring me to continue helping them without understanding the full situation. She said she had raised my mom to be grateful for help, not to mock the people providing it. She seemed genuinely ashamed of how her daughter and granddaughters had behaved. By Wednesday, word of the recording had apparently spread through the family network. Several relatives called to apologize for pressuring me to reconcile without knowing the complete story. My uncle was particularly angry about being manipulated into defending their behavior. The shift in family opinion was dramatic, but not entirely satisfying. While it was vindicating to have people understand why I had cut off financial support, I realized that my relationship with my mom, sister, and aunt might never recover from this betrayal of trust. Thursday brought an unexpected visitor to my workplace. My mom appeared during my lunch break again, but this time she looked different. Instead of the desperate, manipulative person who had been hounding me for weeks, she seemed genuinely remorseful and defeated. She asked if we could talk privately, and I agreed to meet her at a nearby coffee shop. She spent nearly an hour apologizing for her behavior and trying to explain how their financial stress had led them to say cruel things they didn't mean. She acknowledged that the recording proved they had been ungrateful and manipulative. For the first time since the butt dial, she seemed to be taking genuine responsibility rather than making excuses. She said she understood why I couldn't trust them anymore and wasn't asking for money. She just wanted me to know that she was sorry and hoped we might eventually be able to repair our relationship. I appreciated the apology but told her that trust, once broken so completely, would be nearly impossible to rebuild. She accepted this sadly, saying she understood and would give me space to process everything that had happened. As I walked back to work, I reflected on how much my life had changed in just 2 weeks. A accidentally overheard conversation had revealed the true nature of my family relationships and forced me to confront years of financial manipulation disguised as mutual support. The revenge hadn't required elaborate planning or dramatic confrontation. Sometimes the most effective response to betrayal is simply refusing to enable it any longer. By saying no and sticking to that decision, I had forced them to face the consequences of their actions while finally prioritizing my own well-being. The situation was far from resolved, and I suspected there would be more attempts at reconciliation and manipulation in the future. But for now, I had reclaimed control over my finances and my life, even if it meant sacrificing relationships I had thought were built on genuine love and respect.